Right, if everyone's ready, I'd like to start the next session now. I am stepping in for Sean Curran, who sadly can't be with us this afternoon. So to introduce myself again, I'm Matthew Story. I'm a collections curator at Historic Royal Palaces, and I'm really delighted to be introducing this final session of the day, another Fundy showcase. So first up, we have Julie Brown, who is collections curator at the New Art Gallery in Walsall, talking about the Here&Queer project. Over to you, Julie. Oh, and just housekeeping as well. I suggest we have both sessions, and we'll have time for Q&A after we've had all our speakers.
Thanks so much. Hi everyone. So I'm Julie from Walsall in the West Midlands via Dundee. So it was really great to hear of all the great queer activity happening in my hometown earlier. And I just want to say, like, it still feels amazing to be here now in the first permanent queer museum in the UK. Obviously, it's not its permanent home, but it is the permanent institution, and it's obviously a long time coming. So, and it's also been brilliant that as well, as in London, we are celebrating today an increasing number of regional collections that are celebrating queer lives and experiences and on display in museums up and down the country. And I think for me, it's important to say that each museum is unique, the collections are unique, and they're all ingrained within the particular communities they serve. So I think it's important to highlight that context. And with my work, I aim for the publicly owned collections that I manage to try to be meaningful for as wide a range of people as possible and reflective of and representative of contemporary society. So taking a people-centered approach is how I like to term it. And ideally, I want that no one feels that the space isn't welcoming for them. And especially as someone from a working class and neurodiverse background, I'm conscious that institutions haven't always been welcoming for people of all backgrounds. So I like to kind of give a voice to the people. So just to explain a little bit, apologies to those who've heard me present on this topic a little bit before, so there might be a little bit of repetition at the beginning, but for those of you who don't know Walsall in the Black Country, it's a population of roughly 285,000. There's high levels of poverty, so a third of children under 16 live in poverty and in the latest stats. So we're high up in the levelling up agenda. So previously, the industry that Walsall was known for was the leather industry. The Queen's handbags used to always come from Walsall. And then it was quite a thriving market town, but then the impact of the kind of death of the high street is hit. There's increasing levels of crime, lots of knife crime and drugs use, etc. And then here on the slide on the right, we have the gallery, which was designed by Currys of St John and opened in 2000. So there was this surge of redevelopment in the early noughties around the kind of canal area. There's now like a cinema and leisure complexes and flats, and you kind of maybe wouldn't expect there to be this gallery here in the centre of a town like Walsall, which is about 20 minutes on the train from Birmingham. But the reason it kind of exists is that it was created to house the Garman Ryan collection, which was gifted to the people of Walsall by Kathleen Garman, and it's 50 years ago actually this year. So this was impetus to have this brand new gallery in Walsall. So Kathleen Garman had grown up locally in Wednesbury and was a partner of renowned 20th century sculptor Jacob Epstein. So with them, they have amazing associations. Modigliani was a close friend of Epstein, Lucian Freud was their son-in-law. There's also a collection of Epstein's world objects that came as well, and works by European masters like Van Gogh, Picasso and Monet, which came into the collection by bequest of their close friend and granddaughter of a wealthy American tycoon called Sally Ryan. So the gallery tries to showcase the best in contemporary art from across the Midlands, the UK and internationally in the contemporary spaces, as you can see on the left, as well as having a dedicated home for this closed collection of 365 works. We also have historic collections dating from the formation of Walsall's art collection in 1892, plus a contemporary collection which has tripled in size since the new art gallery Walsall opened, and the permanent collection has over 3,500 works now. So post-pandemic, it was recognised that there was a lack of cultural provision for the LGBTQ plus community in the Black Country. And in 2020, I had planned to do a retrospective on Sally Ryan, so the co-founder of the Garman Ryan collection, who was a talented artist herself. So the bust on the left is by Jacob Epstein of Sally Ryan, but then the other sculpture on the top right corner is actually by Sally, and it was produced when she was 18 years old. It was exhibited in the Royal Academy in London. She'd moved to Europe. Obviously, she was very wealthy, to study art and to practice as an artist. She was openly gay. She's an openly gay woman in the 1950s. She dressed in masculine tailoring, had short hair, counter to the kind of norms of the time. At one point, she lived in a suite in the Dorchester Hotel in London with Van Gogh on her wall. And yeah, so she was kind of involved in the high society in London. But really, not much is so much known about her. She's a bit overlooked because she passed away from throat cancer in the 60s, late 60s. So prior to the donation coming to Walsall. So the kind of collection has very much been seen from Kathleen Garman's perspective. So post-COVID, it gave the opportunity to take a kind of new approach with the collections. So we were closed, obviously, as everyone was for the most of 2020. And it was actually our 20th anniversary year as the New Art Gallery Walsall. And because we'd been closed for most of it, we made some small savings that being a local authority, if we didn't spend it, we were going to lose it. So we decided to try and invest into the West Midlands artists who had kind of lost work and opportunities during the pandemic, but also to kind of then, I suppose, commemorate this 2020, this year of our 20th anniversary and this kind of tumultuous events, all the events that happened. So we did an open call out. We didn't expect to be so inundated, but we got, you know, hundreds of applicants. So we thought we'd maybe form a collection of 20 works, but we ended up collecting 32 works from a range of media, a range of artists that was themes from the pandemic and COVID and lockdowns, but also Black Lives Matter and Brexit, and a fantastic work by a trans femme disabled artist about Donald Trump and, you know, everything, cost of living crisis, climate change, all these key issues, very, you know, important societal issues. And it was also the first time that we've ever collected EDI data on the artists. And 2/3 identified as women, which was great as well in terms of gender balance of collections historically, and 1/3 identified as queer. So this was really the catalyst that I wanted to use to embed diversity and continue to make our collections relevant to the people of Walsall today. So what was going to be a celebration of Sally Ryan and her artworks, that we're the only public collection that has them, it became more about queer identity in general, in particular in the Black Country, centering it around queerness being at the heart of our collections. So she's really been the catalyst to explore the collection with the local queer communities. So I was supported on this by John Slee, who I think is lurking online and can't be with us today. So hi, John. But initially I asked him to help me to try to tell some queer stories on social media for LGBTQ History Month in 2021. So we were just opening up post-pandemic, and that sort of got people talking. And then later in the year, I was able to employ him as a freelance consultant because, surprisingly, for an arts organisation, we didn't have any staff with queer lived experience. We're quite a small organisation. 20 core staff members. It's only me in collections, and I have a very small budget of like £8 a year for the collections. So as an ally, I wanted to use the collection for advocacy. However, it didn't feel it was like my place to decide what was queer. I wanted queer people to tell me. So my preferred way of working is in co-production, so opening up the collections for the public. I really liked what Imogen was saying earlier about listening, and I was kind of a facilitation role, allowing people to be heard and giving over my power and privilege to others. So together, John and I approached different groups such as Walsall Council EDI Forum, Walsall College LGBT Society, and LGBT Sparkle Wolverhampton, that were an online group that was established to kind of combat loneliness and isolation during the pandemic. So John really helped as an organisation us to try and build trust with these communities, which was really, really important. So we developed an LGBTQ community panel with whom we started to explore the collections. So both the Garmin Ryan collection, which is kind of on permanent display as a trail, and the permanent collection in the stores, to create a temporary exhibition in our space on floor 2. So taking on board what someone said earlier, it was really important that the participants were paid sort of for their time, and that it was a two-way process, like what could they get out of it. So for a lot, it was that kind of loneliness and isolation and socialization. We had a disabled participant who was actually bedbound, but throughout the project became so comfortable that they were actually able to come and visit the gallery, and have been on several occasions now. So that sort of coming together, there was also like, you know, could we provide work experience, advocacy, what was there to exchange, what could we do, and also to be really wary of emotional toil and the mental safety of participants, giving of themselves, and being mindful of, the institution's kind of privileged positions. That was always something that was very kind of on my mind all the time. I wanted it to be a total co-production and the panel be involved in all stages of the process, but obviously, I was a paid member of staff, and I kind of wrestled with that a lot in terms of not wanting to take advantage of people, and for people to contribute on their own terms, whether that was online or in-person meetups, voting anonymously, interactively, like digitally. And I think what changed as well in my practice is that the key of being flexible, which the pandemic, taught everyone. So it was really great that last year we were able to transform our collection displays to highlight queer lives, objects and stories. And so the key themes that came out, as Dominic and Imogen mentioned as well, so the fact that queerness has always existed, and then when we were engaging with young people, this was a surprise to a lot of them, which amazed me that they thought this was a very contemporary thing, but the fact that queerness has always existed historically and in ancient cultures, that was kind of like a key theme that came up. The kind of the panel were involved in everything, so the kind of use of bright colours in the space, and we used the colours in the Pride flag to represent love and healing and creativity. The Gilbert Baker font was chosen. We made sure that there was a queer designer. We wanted to celebrate queer joy, but also the queer everyday, that not everything's always rainbows. We're careful about the language that we used. We had a code of ethics of working together, ideas around allyship and chosen families, and kind of trying to create a safe space. And we explored kind of ideas around gender fluidity, exploration, and as well as the trail through the collection spaces, you can see the temporary exhibition as well. So it was really well received. This space in particular was feedback that it felt like a safe space. It's been well used. We wanted to create a living room kind of feel, and that we got important feedback in there, that people had openly come out in the space or were visibly moved to see queer representation in Walsall, and the kind of very existence of this was like one of the only queer spaces in Walsall, and it was like an act of kind of activism. A panel member had the confidence to come out as non-binary during the process and use both male and female given names. And there was lots of emotional responses from visitors to see these visible queer stories. and young people especially have really made the space their own, using the resources. And we want to continue in this vein and keep embedding real lived experiences in our displays. So I just wanted to kind of highlight as well, before I finish, that this wasn't a tokenistic kind of one-off project. I was always really keen to make sure that it was about embedding real lived experiences into our displays. So this artist, Corinne, during the project, she was kind of moved by the Van Gogh that we can see on the left here, and she created her own artistic responses, so that when Van Gogh went on loan to Detroit for a few months to an exhibition, that her responses then went in its place. I'll correct myself actually, because they've since changed from she, her to they, them. So their responses have gone on display there. Also, we have Alex Billingham, who is a transgender artist, disabled artist, and they found this work that they were interested in the stores, and then went on to develop a performance on our roof terrace for Pride out of that. So there's been the kind of continuous involvement and growing of the project. We were very grateful for Michael Petrie, who experienced homophobia in Walsall when they did a project in the early noughties. They came to visit the panel and did a talk. They've helped input into the toolkit that we're making as well. We've had an LGBTQ learning and sharing day for all staff members. We've been campaigning for gender neutral toilet signage. As an LGBT youth group, have come, had a tour of the collections, and got inspiration for creating their own artwork to promote LGBTQ safe spaces in Walsall with Yasmin Aguila. Walsall Pride did come back last year, and we did a mural in the Foley with artist Yasmin Aguila, and we did a workshop at Walsall Pride with queer collections artist Sophie, looking at queer ecology and making casts of leaf prints to put your flag on. Because the Pride was actually in the Arboretum in Walsall, and we were kind of looking at the queer botany and the fact that 90+% of plants are queer. It's completely natural. We exist because of plants. These counteracted these arguments of homophobes, and the idea that the perfect flower is one with both gender characteristics, that's known as the perfect flower. So there was a lot of kind of nature and queerness explored as well. So it's not a one-off tokenistic project, but it's about developing that continuous legacy and to help embed continuous institutional change. So we can't go back the way now. It's a starting point. It's not a finished entity. So with different participants, now the panel has grown as a result of the success of the project. And it's now called just a collections community panel, because we're not just one thing. We all have intersections. So we've got, you know, disabled and neurodiverse experiences, mixed ethnicities, working class experiences. We've got new LGBTQ participants through word of mouth of the success of the project, and their choices would be something completely different. So we're continuing to involve diverse displays for the next configuration of the temporary exhibition space for the summer as we speak. So the current Here&Queer temporary exhibition finishes on the 28th of May, but the trail of the Garmerland collection will still be there. So in terms of the funding that we've been grateful to receive, it's in its infancy, but we have set up this holding page for a basic microsite, which will be properly designed and will be able to showcase all our LGBTQ activity. So films we have up already, we've got children's activity sheets, online digital guides, and then we're hoping to have kind of an audio podcast type of sharing, and a toolkit is now in development as well. And John also, just to give a shout out, helped work on a guide for front of house in terms of talking to the public about the Here&Queer trail. And then hopefully that will be developed into a self-guide for the public. And Clive Beardsmore was a queer collector who donated his collection 10 years ago, and the panel found lots of great connections in there, and he's going to be interviewed, and also panel members will be to reflect on the project as well as sort of evaluation. But the important thing is that it's a starting point and not the end of this work. So thank you very much. I need to
Thank you very much indeed, Julie. And now I'm going to hand over to Sophie Meyer, who is the founder and director of Queer Kernow, and Nicki Foley, also of Queer Kernow.
Okay, hi. So we are from Queer Kernow. So Kernow is Cornish for Cornwall. Lots of people don't know that Cornwall is actually, the Cornish have a minority identity status, and that we are a Celtic nation and with a language, with an identity, and that's kind of what we root ourselves in. Nicki and I set up Queer Kernow in 2020.
September 2020, before lockdown.
Mainly as a, actually into lockdown.
Oh yeah, it was into
lockdown because we were bored and unemployed and wanted a job.
Yeah. So we turned a hobby into a job.
So we recently done a project with the museum, and then felt that actually we needed to set up an independent CIC, so we weren't constrained by the limitations of working within an institution. And coming from working within an institution and then also working with the community, I'm the co-chair of Cornwall Pride. And Nicki also is really embedded in the community, used to work with Cornwall Pride.
Yeah.
So we see ourselves a bit, and Queer Kernow a bit, as a linchpin between working with the community and getting the community involved in the heritage sector in Cornwall. So this is a really dry slideshow, I'm really sorry.
We didn't have much time, honestly.
So the funding we got recently from the QHCN was to look into how we can engage and do a bit of training with staff, volunteers and senior management to adopt queer inclusive practices. So the reason why we did this is that in February this year, we had a co-produced exhibition with Cornwall Pride and the Royal Cornwall Museum, bringing a small community exhibition of the history of Pride in Cornwall. It was 15 years of Cornwall Pride's inception, so we wanted to do a bit of a celebration and retrospective. And what really came out of that work was when we went in and we delivered training for the staff, for the volunteers, for the front of house, it was really important to us that we hit all levels of the organisation. There was a really real organisational buy-in, and let's see that.
Yeah, I think we were like really taken back, because a lot of the people which work at the museum, of course, are like allies, and it's kind of, they have the boundaries of like not knowing the language, and a lot of them are like worried to speak out because they don't know the language. So I think they felt nice and happy that we were there and we could give them the education with the language. One of the volunteers was kind of grateful because their granddaughter had just come out, and honestly they were really happy, but they just didn't know how to kind of come over and go, oh, because for some reason, I don't know, with, I'm going to say hetero people, it's just language, but they seem to have this boundary that they don't want to offend. And I think it was good that we were in the museum, because we taught people that they don't need to offend.
Yeah, it's about upskilling the volunteer team and the front of house team. And I think what really came out of this work is that we did it with one museum, and in the midst of doing this project, we had some Cornwall is very rurally diverse, so you get pockets of acceptance and pockets of not so accepting places, and we've had run-ins with that. We've had people saying when they've asked for our consultation, you know, well, we can't use the word flamboyant because that's too loaded a term. We've worked with places where the curator was great, but then they moved on and the new curator wanted to absolutely nothing to do with us and was really offended. And we were a bit like, how can we take this learning and apply it on a grander scale? And that's where Dan kind of saved us with some funding.
I think also it was just like, as Sophie was saying, as soon as somebody left, but all the stories were there that they were queer, but as soon as that person left, all of a sudden their sexual identity of the, for example,
Serena Wadham.
Yes. Had all of a sudden come straight overnight because of like the new director was like, oh no, well there's no evidence. Well, of course there is, and
it really shows that importance. So yeah, that one person leading the charge, that one person in that institution, and it's not institutional change, it's down to that one person. So we kind of set about thinking, how can we create some kind of learning resource, some kind of toolkit to try and challenge that, to try and change that a bit. So one thing Nicki and I are really good at and I hope we're really good at, and really aware of, is that, you know, we can't speak for the whole community. So when we decided to create this thing, a nebulous thing we wanted to change at like a Cornwall-wide level, as opposed to just going into one museum. So the first thing we did is we went and asked the community what they thought. I mean, as part of the community myself, you kind of have this idea of, I know that people aren't going to feel represented. I know that, but how can I get some quotes and take that to the directors of the museums and say, this is what they're saying about things. And we didn't feel like it was appropriate at this point to involve museums. We thought that because we sit externally to that, and we do go to Pride events, being a part of the Pride team as well. So we had a fantastic Cornwall Pride bus tour, which is taking Pride on tour to all the small rural villages and towns around Cornwall that aren't connected and don't have any kind of formal Pride representation. And there was a fantastic event for LGBT History Month in somewhere called Playing Place, which is really rural. And the Pride bus tour stopped there. And we were just asking people, we were going up saying, do you feel represented in Cornwall's museums? Have you ever been to a museum? What are your thoughts? What if you could talk to the head of Tate St Ives, what would you say?
Yeah, we wanted an unbiased voice.
So
they did it. We were in disguise. They didn't know who we were.
So these are some of the responses, and these are just some of. And I think they kind of speak for themselves. And I'm just going to read out two because I know we're short on time. But two important ones, I think, are, one is gay Cornish history. Most people believe gay people were invented down here in the 80s, and they're Emmets. No Cornish person in history was ever gay. So for anyone who doesn't know, Emmet is a bit of a Cornish slur for tourists, meaning fire ant, because they descend in the summer. And then the other quote I wanted to read was, my queer role models were always people in the present and popular celebrities. They were not scientists, writers, lawmakers, or anything aspirational, because I was never seen in history. If I was able to see me in history growing up, I would have challenged my existence less. And so to be able to have these quotes to go in and, okay, we're developing something, we've got responses from the community, we've got our experience from working with that one museum. We then thought, well, we wanted to create something that we could give away to museums, to people, as a bit of like a, here's something. You're not just one person getting the training. Here's something you can take back with you, put in the office, leave there, and then the next person can read it. So we created the second edition of our zine, The Olden Gays, mainly because we love
We have them all to hand out afterwards.
we did bring a stack with us, so if you would like one. And they
have to have one to
yeah,
take home.
It's no choice. And they just have a bit about, it's going chronologically through Cornwall's history with a bit about why it's important we do this work and a bit about the language as well. So we thought, okay, now we've got something we can give to people, we can give out. How do we get in front of the people we want to? And that's where our partnership with the Inclusive Collections Network and Cornwall Museums partnership comes in. Oh, just one thing quickly I wanted to say about this zine is that it's illustrated by the community. When we were writing it, we ran a competition to mainly to get around not having to pay for pictures, copyright. We thought we'll get the community to draw the pictures instead.
Competitions are cheaper than copyright.
Yeah. And it also kind of has that lovely sense of, you know, it's illustrated by people at
Very
workshops
rustic
that we've done, which is a really nice way of getting them involved in the process of making this zine. It wasn't just us, it was everything we do, we try and do in co-creation. So we had a really lovely chat with Cornwall Museums partnership and said, look, we've done this work with one museum, we're having a bit of pushback with some other projects and some other museums we're working with, and we just want to try and do something. Oh yeah, one museum said to us that, oh, we don't have gay people in this town.
Like the circumference of this area has never had a queer person in it. Like never.
We were really tempted to go to the museum and be like, I'm in it.
We were really like phone in a threat of there's a queer in your museum.
Anyway, so we partnered with the Cornwall Museums partnership, who are a fantastic organisation that bring together museums in such a rurally disparate place and offer centralised training, centralised support. And this is just a bit about them. I'm sorry, it's really badly spaced. And they put together something called the Inclusive Collections Network. And it provides a safe space for collections engagement staff, curators, collections managers, paid and volunteer museums all across Cornwall to come together, and then every quarter they have a session on a different theme. And I was like, great, how do we get one of these themes? How do we get one of these sessions? And actually we can disseminate our learning and disseminate what the community has said to us with the people that could make change. And that's what we did. So we ran a session in St Ives at the St Ives School of Painting with 15 participants from different local organisations, from the National Trust down to a tiny volunteer museum in Padstow. All of them received our free zine and a handful to take back to their organisations and share. We shared the feedback from the community, but we also had practical provocations such as how can your organisation be more welcoming? A lot of the feedback from the community centered around access over content, which I think was really important, and not something that I don't think we've taken as seriously. You think about how can we get the museums to put in a permanent queer trail or change a caption in the permanent gallery, and that's great, but unless people actually feel safe coming through your doors, there's no point doing that. So we were starting from that kind of level. And then what we wanted to do was to come away from this this kind of network meeting with a bit of a toolkit, with a bit of key points for inclusion and how can we share this. And we were really keen that these points for inclusion came from the participants. They weren't led by us. We led the project, we led the session, but in terms of the thinking, and we hope we had an open forum. I'd like to think that people who took the network
we
session,
gave them earworms.
Yeah. So they could kind of say, you know, what do you need to be able to, you know, do rural inclusion really? So this is some of the key points that came out of that strategy meeting and training. And we are actually going to write up this in a toolkit for rural inclusion. I think there's more to add, but this is what was led by the participants. Progress isn't linear. Don't put it on the staff. It should be organizational. I think that's a point that's really come across strong today. Yeah. Turn strategy into action, connect it to everyday practice. I think this is an important one. We were chatting with representatives from the National Trust who were saying, you know, we've got a strategy for inclusion, but we're doing a new toilet block. I don't think anyone's brought up the fact that it could be gender neutral toilets. Has that been thought about? Things like that. Invest in training for volunteers and staff, invest in your people, allow for creativity and allow projects to grow organically. When you're co-creating, I think it's really important to give space to breathe and to build in time. I think time is the most important thing. Understand the importance of small signalling, so ally schemes with local queer organisations. This is mainly around the work with access and letting people know they were safe, and that if a lot of the people we spoke to at the History Month event were saying, you know, if we're from a very rainbow family, as they put it, how do I know that if I go to a museum and someone starts something, I'm going to be backed up? And I think that's important. So showing those little signifiers that I'm sure, you know, as a queer person, you pick up on, like the flag in the window or the pronoun badge on a staff member or something like that. These little indicators, subliminal messaging that just let people know it's safe here. Relinquish authority. I think that's a big one that's also been a theme from today. And stick to your values in the face of trolls or trustees. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of museums have good trustee boards. Just in my personal experience, we felt like we had to include that because change is only possible if the whole organization is behind it. And as we've spoken about a lot today, not just me, that it's often left down to that one person. So what happens when that one person leaves? And I think this training and this rural toolkit that we're creating is kind of our response to how we can challenge that in Cornwall, and how we can really make it a more inclusive organization, not just one person fighting the fight from the inside and really being battered down by it. Because I've been that person, and I don't think it's fair. And I think that if what we can do as Queer Kernow is go in and offer support to
build allyship,
and build allyship. So then what's next is that we are using this training beyond museums. Cornwall is really, really rural.
Hence the photos.
Hence the photos.
The most rural ones we could find.
And I also work with the Cornwall Heritage Trust, which is like English heritage but in Cornwall. So we're
Oh shit.
so we're really, really keen to get it outside museums and to have this kind of training and understanding in outdoor heritage as well, which is a huge thing that well, it's huge for Cornwall because it's really rural and a lot of our historical archaeological sites are outside. Yeah, so that's what we're currently kind of the next stage of this is to roll it out with our partners, rural partners, and then to create this rural inclusion toolkit.
Yeah.
And that's us.
The end. Oh yeah, have it.
Great, thank you very much. I think we've got about just over 5 minutes for questions, so we can get some questions in. Julie, do you want to come back here? And I'll just hover. So does anyone have any questions for our speakers? Yep, Richard.
Thanks. They were really brilliant talks. Thanks so much. It's a question for all of you that speaks to your last point with lots of laughs about trolls and trustees, but the question is for all of you about what strategies you've used in the face as all the projects have unfolded, where you've encountered some nervousness, anxiety, not always necessarily a explicitly negative attack, but some uncertainties. What have you put in place to try and shore up and build support from the organisation, from Walsall, and also the organisations that you've worked with?
I think for us, it was really important to persevere because to do a staff kind of learning and sharing day. We didn't want to call it training, but a kind of learning and sharing day, because so that people, and to create a kind of safe space that there's no stupid questions, like we came together with participants, myself and John Slee, and just come together, ask us things. How have you been experiencing things? What are the questions from the public? Because there was a bit, and it's kind of like what you mentioned about language as well, and people worried about saying the wrong thing or what's the correct, what's appropriate words to use. And so that was kind of, I think, quite key for us, that to reassure staff to be able to have those conversations was really important. So staff training, I guess, for us.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same. I think a lot of people live in fear of offending, and that's the biggest kind of boundary we've had. I think I blame a lot of that on Section 28, because they're just like, can't say words, and I was like, totally can say words, and they're like, we can't. And then I feel like we have to like mother them just for them to be able to like and say queer. Say it, and then they're like, okay, and then after they say it a few minutes, and then they have a cup of tea, then they come back, and it normalizes it for them, and like, yeah, and it's taken us a couple of years. And Cornwall's not really that big, but we're making our way around. One cup of tea by the day, and yeah, I think it's more so with trustees as well, that because I guess they're like business brains, aren't they? And because it's business, it's not inclusive business. It's like, and it's, yeah, so we're getting there.
Yeah. Just to kind of follow up on that, what Nicki said about, what we faced in terms of resistance. I think it's been multifaceted. we work with some really good curators that then are hampered by kind of, you know, higher ups or whoever's doing the sign off on certain language and things like that. So this is why we wanted to produce something that, you know, even if you're not in that training session with us, you've got something to take back. I think promoting good governance is also really, really important. There are still museums in Cornwall where trusteeships basically inherited seats. If your family donated something to the museum 100 years ago, you still get a seat on the trustee board, that kind of thing. So, you know, just trying to promote good practice, just trying to be like, come on, along for the ride rather than anything else.
Yeah, it doesn't have to look good on the CV.
Great, thank you very much. Does anyone else have a question for our speakers? Have we got anyone online as well? No? No, I should think of one for myself, but you seem to cover everything so beautifully. In which case I might, as we've gone a little bit over our published time, call it to a close today. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you everyone online for joining us as well. We've got an amazing day tomorrow as well, which I'm going to try and join you for some of online. But just to close, can we now have another huge round of applause, maybe a whoop as well for our speakers.